Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me out there. This is Matt Knight, Director of Content Solutions here at Spiceworks, and this is another Spiceworks production. Today we're going to learn how Kevin Bacon can save our content strategy. Kind of a big promise. I swear we're going to have some very actionable takeaways for you guys here at the end, and you'll see how Kevin Bacon actually does play a role. Feel free to email me. I'm not going to be fielding any questions throughout this presentation. I want to make sure we get through everything, but at the end, I'll give you guys an email address that you can send questions to. I'm happy to hop on a call or run through anything with you guys and help you out however I can. So just keep that in mind. The agenda today is we're going to focus on kind of 4 core areas, if you will, and this is all designed to help you guys with your 2018 content planning, and also how you're going to create a more consistent voice, hit more of your demand goals, and make the best use of your investment dollars across the funnel, as we're going to learn in 2018 and going forward. So the first section of what we'll cover on is the importance of aligning content to your sales funnel. So that's all the way from marketing, running programs, and then handing off qualified leads to sales, and why we need to look at things through that lens, and some things that a lot of you guys are probably already doing to help calculate what kind of investment you need to put into content production and media programs. And some of you guys maybe aren't doing, so this should be really helpful, kind of a cheat sheet and a new lens of looking at that. The second piece of what we're going to cover today is understanding more about the people involved in ultimately deciding to either purchase from you or not purchase from you. This is essentially where we're going to break down the nuances in the IT decision maker, or ITDM, and the business decision maker, or BDM. Third, we're going to talk about the buying funnel within IT. So this is a great guideline. A lot of you guys have probably already seen. I've done a lot of presentations on this. We've produced a lot of material around this as well, but we've done a lot of research to figure out essentially how you properly nurture this audience and what the IT buying cycle looks like. And then we want to take that and we want to use that as a guiding principle for our content creation. So we're going to go through that. And then now that we have all these really good understandings and deep kind of enthusiasm for what we can do, we've got to figure out then how to make the most out of what we have in something that I like to call the Kevin Bacon rule of content. It's essentially the art of repurposing. So we're going to talk about, now that we understand how to look at the market and our budget and our goals for the year, how do we leverage Kevin Bacon and repurpose content at each phase of that journey to create a consistent voice, more efficient effort, and less of a heavy lift. All right, so getting started, always have the end in mind. This is where we're going to break down the sales funnel. And this has been important to me just as a marketer, and for those of you that don't know, for the last decade I've been predominantly agency side, all B2B digital tech agencies, and then a couple of years on the software side, so in-house running digital marketing. And this has been really helpful in me securing my past budget when I was in-house, and also just to look at things through a lens that always plays back into revenue and the bottom line, which I know in marketing is a constant challenge. So I think this is going to be really helpful for everybody. So we know that marketing and sales essentially are tied together, and we need to understand pretty intimately what it looks like, what that handoff looks like, and what the efforts look like. So this first kind of part of understanding this, I like to say is, or I like to call building the base, essentially is how you understand and read this life cycle within your own company. So like I said before, if you look at this whole thing of creating demand and driving it down, marketing is obviously at the very top of that funnel. Marketing is capturing an audience or capturing a cold lead, nurturing that lead or that audience to a point of feeling confident in at least talking to someone about your product, and then delivering the most relevant audience members who have properly been nurtured to sales, who then takes it from there, and they are going to take in those leads. Hopefully they're qualified, hopefully close them, and hopefully turn it into revenue. Pretty straightforward, but I think it's important to look at this and keep it in mind, especially for those of you that have more and more meetings with across sales and sales leadership. And the reason why is because if we look at things like this, we're able to develop measurable milestones, which I'm going to go through some pretty basic ones here, some ones that I've used in the past. And then from that, we'll get to the point of that's how we're going to start to figure out what kind of content we need to build based on where we need to perform at each of these milestones. So the first one is just overall impressions, right? And we're going to start to get more granular as we go further down this funnel. From impressions, it's actual engagements, right? And that could be something like sharing, but predominantly we're going to focus on hopefully conversions into a lead. And then how do you push that lead via nurture down to an MQL or a marketing qualified lead? Those are going to be kind of important for marketing. That's what we're going to look at. From sales, you want to think, and I know everyone has different versions of this, but at its core, some kind of accepted lead, some kind of opportunity or sales qualified opportunity, and then a closed won or a closed loss, but hopefully a closed won. If we look at these and we have our marketing operations and sales operations teams gelling, so to speak, then we can easily benchmark each of these efforts or kind of transitions, I guess. And that's critical in planning. So if you don't already do that, work with your operations teams to get these numbers and figure out what your averages are across different verticals, different SKUs, whatever it might be. And then you can use that as a great kind of linchpin for what kind of content investment you need to make and where you need to go to market and where you need to focus. So a quick example is this, right? So 0.01% engagement, a lead conversion rate of 43%. We're going to say that MQLs or marketing qualified leads, half of them convert to an accepted lead, 2/3 of them convert to an opportunity, of which around half will actually close. This is completely hypothetical, but just use this for the sake of this exercise. Once we have this, then we can actually plan, like I said. So you can establish a revenue target first, right? So if you know that in your company that you've got, or your BU or your vertical or whatever you're in charge of, $766,000 is going to be the revenue target for this quarter or this month or whatever it is. Then, and if you know your average sales price is $1,000, then you can essentially reverse engineer. This is the art of demand waterfall, and you can work your way backwards to figuring out all the way to the top how many impressions you probably need to hit. Which ultimately, once you then break that across media channels, will help us in understanding what kind of content we need to build. So in this case, we need 766 closed won deals. I'm not going to read these out loud. I'll just go through them. But you can see we're just doing the math backwards and getting to eventually a lead count number of 10,000 leads. So that's a really good point to know. So we know we need to build content that's going to be lead driven or driving to content that is lead generating. And then even working up higher past the lead goal, like I said, the total impressions goal. Completely hypothetical, but again, the more we understand this, the more that you guys understand it and you're able to present back during your QBRs how your content programs are playing into this or your media programs, the better you guys are showing your impact on the bottom line and the more refined your efforts can become. So hopefully this isn't too overwhelming, or hopefully most of you guys are already doing this. Again, like I said, if you want to go through more of this or talk to me about your 2018 planning, just shoot me an email. You can go ahead and email it spicycontent@spiceworks.com. I will put up a slide at the end showing it again. Okay, so for the sake of today and Kevin Bacon, who I hope is registered for this, what we're going to focus on is the marketing side of this funnel and understanding that audience, the process in which they're going through, aka their funnel. How do we map content back to it, and then how do we get the most out of this Kevin Bacon rule so that we can make sure we're touching on each of these core phases. None of these are more important than another. I'll say that a lot of companies that I work with or have worked with in the past either tend to focus or skew really heavily, down funnel or trying to just deliver leads versus capturing and nurturing or mid funnel or top funnel or whatever it might be. So keep in mind how important everything here is. All right, so the more you know, we're going to talk a little bit about the IT and the business decision maker, so respectively the ITDM and BDM, because they are the ones making the decision to buy from you or your competition. They are basically two very different but in sync personas. The first we have the IT decision maker. This is Jeff. He has an engineering degree. You know, he has 16 years of experience in sysadmin work, network administration, IT management, and IT director type levels. He loves Star Wars. He's a big-time World Wrestling Federation watcher. That's old school WWF, not new school WWE. So kind of an interesting guy, but more than anything, he's implementing, managing, and running all of the tech that's being adopted by the company that he works for. This is his counterpart. This is the BDM. This is Jason. So Jason is a Stanford grad with an MBA, and he is focused on finance and the bottom line. He's got to figure out what investments to make and how it's going to enable the business. He's very focused on business needs and how to scale the company. And he loves racing stock cars in his free time. So very different people, but both have the same kind of goal of figuring out if we're going to invest in the tech, what is that tech going to be, why, and how are we going to roll it out. Obviously, a lot of you guys already know, but we sit on top of this audience in a really unique position. So we have millions, specifically the ITDMs, millions of them that are engaging with us on a monthly basis. And from that, we've conducted a lot of research with both the BDM and ITDM to figure out if they're going to make a decision, what does that process look like? So there are essentially 6 core things that happen, if you will, throughout this process, 3 really leading up to the purchase and then a couple after the fact. The first is determining a need, so figuring out that there is a business need, some kind of application that's necessary. The second is doing research and figuring out, okay, well, what's going to solve that need and what does it mean for us? And the third and final being, okay, I get it, I understand the need, I understand the solutions that are out there, I understand which solution we need to use, and I understand who the best vendor or partner is going to be to work with. Then the actual decision happens, which is essentially the writing of a check. And then it's implemented and either renewed or expanded upon or killed altogether because it was a good experience. For the sake of today's conversation, we're really going to focus on the first 3 leading up to decisions being made. The role that these 2 guys play is really critical for us to understand on an intimate level when we go into our content strategy development. As you can see, the determination of need, research, and recommending a vendor is insanely high for an ITDM, which makes complete sense because they're going to implement and manage this going forward. They also understand their network and their environment more intimately and better than anybody in the company. On the flip side of that, the BDM is involved over 50% of the time for the most part. Outside of implementation, they're kind of hands-off. They are involved, but they're kind of there at a higher level, just seeing, okay, well, just give me the bits on how this actually will solve the business need. I don't need to know the granularities. So this means that you do need to create content that's relevant to both of these guys, but a lot of the focus, especially on the technological level or granularity level, is going to be really aimed towards the ITDM. We've dubbed these different phases in ways that help create that guiding principle to nurture this audience, which is what we're going to go through. And the first we call discovery. So that determining a need is coming from the discovery of some kind of problem or opportunity. From a content perspective, that's an opportunity for you guys to build something that will spur on the discovery of that opportunity or problem. The second phase of research is immersion. So this is where, in particular, the IT decision maker is very immersed in this process of problem solving. So they're heavily vetting the idea, the potential problem solving mechanism, what it is, how it would play nicely or poorly with the company and their environment. They're not yet determining a brand to work with, although they are assessing them, which we'll get into what that means for you guys in a minute. And then finally, decision. So the decision is actually being made before the final decision, the actual check is being written. So again, this is where ITDMs are going to be heavily involved in vetting the competitive set. They're going to go in and make a business case typically to go with vendor X over vendor Y. So this is how that sequence looks. Then a technology would be adopted, and then the next 2 kind of key points for content can play in, although we're not going to touch on them today, would be association. So what is the experience like with that brand after you do implement a technology? Do you start to gain a higher affinity? Are you having frustrations? There's a new intimate kind of level of understanding between the brand and the user. And there are ways to reinforce that with content. And then finally, advocacy. So can you push them to a state of becoming an influencer and advocating for your brand? We'll have to do another session on those two. For today, we're going to focus on the first three. So essentially prospecting. A few other stats from our research is around the number of assets being consumed at each of those core funnel phases. I talked about discovery, immersion, and decision. And you can see the ITDMs are consuming a lot more content. BDMs are consuming around 9 minimum assets, and the ITDM are consuming a minimum of 16. If that seems surprising to you, it probably shouldn't be, because IT is incredibly thorough. They're also very skeptical. They're risk averse because that's what their job is. So when they're consuming information, they're consuming a lot of it. You can see that the highest level of consumption is at that immersion stage, so mid-funnel, and then that's when they're researching. So they're active. They're trying to figure out what it all means. So not any real surprise there, but the numbers themselves, I think a lot of what you might see in broader B2B tech kind of thought leadership spaces is, you know, maybe it's 6 assets, 8 assets, and whatever. What we're finding is that's just not true. There's a lot of content being consumed here if you actually add it up. And if you treat the ITDM and the BDM as different audiences, which we would recommend, you're looking at a minimum of 25 assets being consumed from a vendor before making a decision. But fret not, that's going to be part of the how Kevin Bacon's going to help us out. So stay tuned. That's coming up here shortly. So now that we understand a little bit more about the audience that's buying from us, that's vetting our product, our solution, we have to understand the journey itself. So let's take that last tidbit of information and really break it out and understand the importance of why. The importance of why is pretty straightforward, that we know around 68% of the engagement with a vendor is actually happening before they engage with the vendor. So that is to say, they're discussing your solutions or the problems that you solve without your involvement, without them going to your .com or talking to your sales reps directly, although they are consuming your information through 3 core kind of channels and in 3 different kind of ways I like to highlight. So if we think about our content strategies, let's also think about them in these veins and make sure that we're covering each. The first is publisher content. So if you go to a third party or publisher, if you go into CIO.com or Wired or CNET or Spiceworks or whatever it might be, you want to hear from an editorial team. You want to know what's relevant and going on in the space. So this is where articles and blogs can become important. A lot of sponsored content opportunities are important here. The second would be peer-created content. So this is, think socially, right? Could be Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Those are more predominant for a BDM. For an ITDM, you're probably going to see more Spiceworks, Reddit, and places like that. But this is, they're going to kind of look for product reviews, try to hear what the socially their peers are saying about a certain solution. Whether it's about yours or a product or just the solution itself, it really doesn't matter. They're just looking for someone else's voice. And then finally, they do want to hear from you, and this is where we're going to focus a lot on today, is what does a vendor need to be saying? They want to know what your point is. They want to know what your position is. They want to know how you problem solve. So we've built a framework for that. I alluded to this earlier, but how do they pass through this kind of process? And the only reason we only have ITDM here on the left on this slide is we're going to focus mostly on just discovery, immersion, decision. If you look at brand awareness or high-level business need awareness and low-level business case development, those kind of hit on both the BDM and ITDM. But for today in this exercise with Kevin Bacon, we are going to focus on just the centerpieces, which are the most active. So essentially, what we understand is that there's a very clear process in which this happens. We know it's not linear. all the time, which is totally fair. So as much as we would like it to be, it's not. But we know that it looks like this. We've done a lot of research and had a lot of surveys filled out and focus groups done with both ITDMs and BDMs to figure out how they're consuming and what they're consuming at each of these stages. So if you focus on discovery, we understand that this is really critical for you to produce content that does tell a relevant macro story or some kind of phenomena in the marketplace. And then that you're able to relate that back to the audience. So you're able to say 70% of IT directors are planning to do this or already doing it or something like that. The immersion stage, so after that need's been understood and they're going into heavy vetting of a solution, not necessarily a product yet, this is about you, the vendor, showing your expertise and helping to problem solve, right? So you just want to become more and more relevant, fresher, more trusted, more of an advisor or consultant in the space is kind of the vibe you want to give off. And then finally, decision. There's two pretty basic table stakes here, but they are very critical, and that's the technology itself and then the trust. So how do you differentiate on a tech level? How granular are you getting? Are you leaving out a lot of details that maybe someone who's going to manage or implement your solution really needs to know or wants to know? And then on the flip side of that, from a trust perspective, is can they get a really good understanding of what it's going to be like to partner with you? If there's a feeling that you're going to bail after they've purchased, you're not going to get a renewal. In fact, these guys are very loyal, but they're also very skeptical, and they don't really forget. So if they have a bad experience, they will go out of their way to let it be known. If they have a great experience, they'll go out of their way to let it be known. So we're going to show you a few examples of that, but this is the framework that our team takes to market with a lot of our partners. And what we do then is, if you look at the narrative and if you believe in it, then you've got to figure out from a media perspective how to best get that message out there. And the key to that is a diverse portfolio. So it's like anything else. So this is where, you know, it just, everything becomes so compounded, right? Oh my God, there's so many pieces of content now that I can see that I have to create. And the key first is just seeing it. So using a framework like this is critical. And then figuring out how to attack it efficiently. And that's what we hope the Kevin Bacon rule today is going to help us do. You can see here the portfolio is built off experience, right? So the experience going from, on one axis, from being a static experience to an interactive experience, or a snackable experience versus an experiential experience, helps us to break down the media channels and the channel mix itself that we would then use for the content we want to create. And we want to see no gaps basically here. So no shortage, every quadrant should have some activity in it. And that's going to help us kind of plan for what we want to have created. Quickly, I'm going to go through a few examples at each of these stages: discovery, immersion, and decision, of what we're looking for, and then we're going to jump into the Kevin Bacon rule. The discovery phase, we mentioned this earlier, at least 5 assets from the ITDM being consumed here, around 4 for the BDM. The good thing about this top of funnel stuff is actually is really relevant to both IT and ITDMs and BDMs. There might be some nuances where, for example, IT really wants to hear what's going on from an IT perspective, but you can get both points across that there's something going on in the industry that you guys both need to know about. And then here's how, on a more granular level, some people in this space that have your same kind of job are attacking it. Some of the things here that we know have worked really well are things like interactive quizzes. So how do you test someone's knowledge, right? And that's a great way of presenting data back to an audience, but in an engaging way. We know that industry and third-party sponsored reports or white papers actually are really good, especially for BDMs. For ITDMs, not as much, but they do play a role. On the flip side of that, you can't just have everything be a third party. You really need your own voice at this stage. And that's where research comes in. So you want to do a lot of research to collect your own data so that you have your own story to tell. Things like ebooks are great here. Blogging and article writing is fantastic. Animated videos, we actually have learned have high demand. Videos in general, 87% of our ITDMs say that they want more video. And it's because it can communicate either something really conceptual or a lot of data in a really simplified way. And it's a really good piece for rich media ad unit placements, pre-roll, things like that. The second stage of immersion, obviously this is the most involved from what we've already talked about, and this is where, again, business need is understood now. You're just going to figure out how to solve it. So at this stage, you really want to be, this is how you really solidify thought leadership. And I know that's a buzzy term, but a lot of people think that they can just do discovery and put a lot of reports out and then they're a thought leader. And they miss this step of actually humanizing who you are and engaging with an audience. So think a little more interactive at this stage, and that could be digitally interactive through events. You could be doing a really cool SMU video series where you've got your own IT director or someone else who's constantly being put up in front of the audience. You know, again, a lot of article and blog writing, building checklists, how-tos, guides, things like that are really important here. So how do you show them how to problem solve and let them know what your philosophy is on it? You're not really in the weeds on product yet until you get here at Decisions, and then you've kind of earned the industry's right to break down your product's differentiation. So this is where you're going to get technologically relevant and differentiated. You're also going to differentiate, hopefully, on things like customer support or more intangible things like that. So what is a peer validated response to working with a company like yours? So testimonials and case studies are critical here, product reviews, things like that. Okay, so that was kind of a quick re-rundown on our methodology, where we're coming from, and hopefully that's a good guideline for you guys moving forward. If you think about mapping back to the sales funnel in the beginning, I know we didn't get too granular, but again, think in that construct and then think back to that broader funnel. If we're touching on all those bases, we should be able to have a diverse enough media program and content strategy in the marketplace that we can continue to push down those MQLs to a state that they're converting, and then constantly just gut check it, right? Look at the benchmarks. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? How are individual media channels performing, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the Kevin Bacon rule of content. A lot of you guys probably already know about repurposing, maybe at a high level or a deep level or whatever it might be. Hopefully a lot of you guys do. And some of you may have heard me use this term before. I was actually in a meeting last week in Denver where I had someone who didn't know that I had kind of coined this term and made it up in a few presentations I've done. And she was like, yeah, cool, I'm excited about, you know, I'm signing up for a webinar for this Kevin Bacon rule of content. And I guess that's a thing. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's becoming a thing. Good, people are talking about it. So we're just going to keep going with it. I think it's sticky, it's memorable. Hopefully it makes sense to all you guys. So we know that only 29% of marketers actually repurpose content, which is really disappointing. And what we mean by repurposing content is essentially taking an asset you've already built, you've already done the heavy lifting of building it, and then turning it into other pieces of content so that you can make sure that you have a more ubiquitous presence, right? So different format types, if you go back to that portfolio quadrant I showed you earlier, allow you to promote content in different ways so you get more impressions. 29% is low. That's a bit disconcerting. The rule, the Kevin Bacon rule itself, and how this makes sense is a lot of you guys probably know about I've heard 5 degrees, 6 degrees, 7 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon, right? He's acted at least with some actor who has then acted with some other actor who has maybe acted with some other actor, and somehow basically every film, every 5 films is connected to Kevin Bacon. So he's basically the most ubiquitous actor, and this is all love to Kevin Bacon. Tremors was like my childhood, watching that movie every day, which is probably not a good thing in hindsight, but it was so cool, loved it. I think he's great, so I'm actually really proud to have found a way to fit him into content strategy and B2B tech. But basically, we want to take that same effect of having this ubiquitous presence always around and always being seen no matter where I'm at or where my mindset is, and we want to apply that to our content strategy. So that's how I want to define this. That's the Kevin Bacon rule of content that we've defined here. And this is basically a tool for how to do it. So the Kevin Bacon rule of content and the art of repurposing have 2 kind of core starting spots. The first is leveraging your site analytics. So we don't want to waste, and the key of the Kevin Bacon rule and repurposing is just not wasting your energy, your time, your already existing effort. How do we find low-hanging fruit? So if you actually go look at your blog posts, your articles, whatever it is that you're posting on there, even your resource library, product pages, you'll see very clear spikes of engagement, low levels of bounce rates, very positive metrics in certain places. You can go look socially too and see where your shares are coming in and where they're not. Use that as a starting point to figure out maybe a theme that you need to run with. So let's say that you have produced something about GDPR and what implications that's going to have on the industry here soon in May, and it's getting crazy traction. Maybe you're the first there, or you're talking about it in a very nuanced way, and people are picking it up and they're running with it, and it's getting a lot of engagement. Well, then maybe you take that and you build a lot of long-form content from that blog, right? So that's one way of looking at the beginnings of the Kevin Bacon rule of content. The other, which is always tried and true, is actually do a heavy lift up front, right? And I would definitely recommend planning in this kind of vein, but we kind of dub it research and repeat. Do custom research, collect data, something relevant and credible to be consumed. Build a hero asset out of it. So maybe it's a really cool ebook or something like that. And then take that hero asset that could be gateable for lead gen and spin it off into a ton of mini pieces of content that then in turn promote back to that long form piece of content. That way you're getting the most traction possible on this cool top of funnel effort that you've done, and you are getting closer to solidifying yourself as the thought leader. So those are kind of two ways of starting, just if you're looking for a place to start. The rule itself and the structure here is going to be aligned to the importance of it, how it might work, what it really means, and then how you can align it to your media goals and your media strategy. So for all of us in the digital marketing world, we kind of think of things in three core categories, and that is paid media, owned media, and earned media, right? A lot of times we'll think about our budget in that way. We think about how we place certain advertising efforts or content efforts differently in those different places. And we also know that there is a direct impact between all of those places, or all of those buckets and one another, right? So the more paid and owned we're doing that's actually relevant, the more our earned effort actually becomes impacted, right? Because we're getting more relevant, socially shareable content or whatever it might be. The other thing we've seen, if you think about the funnel itself that I showed earlier, is that there's a direct correlation between the effort skewing, starting with heavy paid up front at the top of the funnel, to less paid when you get to more bottom of funnel, because you have a more captive audience and you're able to do more outbound efforts. Something to keep in mind there. So we're going to start with discovery. So this is the top of funnel that we talked about earlier, and we're going to start with an example of that ebook, right? So the Kevin Bacon rule of content would say you can't just leave this ebook alone as your top of funnel effort and then kind of move on to the next thing. It's got some really good information in it, and we need to look at that through the lens of how do we expand across our paid, owned, and earned media opportunities. So the ebook itself is great. We can get, from a paid perspective, display ads, some sponsored posts, maybe socially, that would be really good. And then from an own perspective, obviously we're going to put it up on our .com. We have our own social channels that we'll post for free. That's fantastic. But it still leaves a lot of holes. So if I create an infographic from the ebook and maybe an animated video from the ebook that quickly summarize the ebook and drive more traffic to it, now I have a pre-roll opportunity for placement. I have a retargeting asset. And I'm going to keep going, right? So, well, if the ebook is written in a way where each chapter is essentially a different relevant data-backed point, then those are individual blogs. So now I have content to put on my blog, which impacts my .com, which also impacts SEO. But I could keep going even more. If I have data, I can take data, and if it's constructed in the right way, I should be able to re-communicate that data back to the audience in something more interactive, like a quiz, to test their knowledge around that data, which is a fantastic piece. It's very nuanced. It might be something that would be a good paid search initiative, and it's something that can entice more social shareability, which would impact earned, right? At the end of the quiz, you can ask them to share it socially through Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and start leveraging a lot of their audience members. But I'll keep going just for the sake of sixes. And the sixth asset here, maybe a video meetup. So again, you have this great data, you need to go communicate it out to the marketplace. So maybe you have a kind of roundtable like event with yourself and some other peers in the industry, or even just yourself in general, and you're talking about what you discovered, what it means for the industry, this, that, and the other. Take that recorded version, and that's a great syndication offer. You can see how this all works. The beauty of this too is, so we started with one piece of content that was gateable, and we essentially ended with 2 pieces that are gateable and 6 total pieces and way more of a potential media mix. So if you go back to the sales funnel, we now are getting closer and closer to being able to hit our engagement rate, making it better and providing more and better impressions at different places. So this would be an example of the Kevin Bacon rule of content applied to the discovery phase. We'd want to apply this to every single phase. I wish it was more linear, where I could take the top of the funnel and repurpose it all the way down, but it doesn't work that way because the storyline changes so much. Although there should be consistencies in branded look and feel and storytelling and stuff like that. But here, same kind of rule, right? So go back in and look at your site analytics, look at research and repeat, maybe do a big effort around something guide-like around a topic, and then apply that to the mid-funnel effort or immersion. So here we have what we call an e-guide, right? And that's a great hero asset. It's good for display advertising, sponsor posts. This could be a really good syndication tool. We'll put it on our .com. Now that we're moving down the funnel, we can do more email, right? Because we actually have a captive audience at this point that's immersed, that is actively looking for information, so they're going to open your emails. Good for your social channels. But we shouldn't stop there, right? So animated video allows us to do pre-roll and retargeting as well. We could build an assessment tool from the information in the guide and maybe question the audience to kind of assess themselves and see where they land. So if you're guiding them and saying, hey, you have 8 steps to get from point A to point B, maybe it's about becoming a more hybrid department or something like that, the assessment tool could take that same information and say, hey, answer these questions and then see how many steps you have left or something like that. Again, another engaging, nuanced way, a good paid search piece, also good for retargeting. We could take that same rhetoric, if we have 8 different steps, for example, in this guide, have an 8-episode video series that features an SME within your company talking about each of those 8, right? So now you have something that's very shareable socially, like for in-feed video efforts, also good for retargeting, good for pre-roll and things like that. Have that same contributor write blog posts or articles for the company, right? So we're just creating this kind of bigger experience. You can see it kind of growing, and again, this plays into your blog, which impacts SEO, and then another digital event. So this would be a great opportunity to take the SME who's maybe communicated this guide, take that structure, and put her on a show, record it, and have her engage live, and then take the recorded version of that and kind of continue to see that out in the market. All it's doing is creating the storyline that you want to have visible, a more visible path or universe for that storyline. And just like with the other, in this effort, we now have 3 pieces that could be gated. Obviously, if you have the luxury of not gating everything, don't do it. But we always need to take it into consideration, because at the end of the day, if we can't build leads and we can't nurture them down and we can't capture them in that right way and pass them to sales and show the attribution, then it becomes harder and harder for marketers to secure budget. So finally, we get down to the decision phase, and we're going to do this same kind of way, right, but just different content. So case studies are fantastic pieces. What's unfortunate is you'll see a lot of companies will go recruit for a case study, which is great for display advertising to put on your website and through social channels. And we're not really doing much else with the fact that we've actually gone and recruited someone, which is the hardest part about doing a case study. So we should always double down and do a video testimonial with a case study. In fact, I would never build a case study without doing a video testimonial, because the video itself, just the change in the format type and the way it's consumed and the kind of more emotional state of it, allows us so many other avenues of promotion and really starts to create a legitimacy and credibility behind what we're trying to show is true to form via our peers validating it. So like I said, this helps with, right, sponsor posts or in-feed could be really good. Pre-roll and retargeting, we now have video. We know 87% of this audience wants more video, so it's just kind of a no-brainer. The other thing we could do is when you have someone that's recruited, get them to do product reviews for you as well. Like if you do this on your own site, you're working with a partner maybe like Bazaarvoice to aggregate it, or you just want them to go out to these 8 websites like Spiceworks or other forums, and review it, tell them to do it. You know, they will. You have them captive. Reviews are critical. I think it's something like 90 or higher % of ITDMs look at reviews as a very legitimate kind of point of whether or not to consider a company or not, which is seems obvious, but you know, it's not the easiest thing to get. So I think the nice effort of building case studies and testimonials, which builds into that funneled approach of building trust and technological relevance, is that coupled with the reviews, just everything starts to feel safer in some ways. So these guys, again, are very risk averse, so this is the kind of stuff they're looking for. Which is another thing potentially for SEO, right? Some of this indexes, a lot of product reviews indexed, so we have that on there. The other side of it, we talked about tech and trust. That's more trust. The tech part is really getting granular with your product. So in a different effort, you'd probably take that same concept and build like a comparison guide, maybe something that's getting really in the weeds on your product or solution and even showing it compared to competitors. Well, if you take the person that you recruited for the case study and testimonial and you get good quotes from them, you can pepper that into the comparison guide. Maybe you even get something from, maybe they moved from a competitor to you, and you actually get a quote on that, and you have that in the comparison guide. So not only are you saying, guys, look, we do all this and more, and we're better, but here you can even hear it from their mouth, and maybe then that links back to the video and case study, right? You can see how all this can play together very nicely. The guide itself would be a really good tool for syndication, retargeting, and a lot of the other stuff you already see on here. The beauty of this too is you could take something more in depth like a guide and make it more granular and simple and to the point quicker through one-sheeters or spec sheets, right? And these aren't boring, and I know a lot of people use these, field marketers will create these more for sales as an enablement resource, but this audience wants these. We have the stats on it. We know a high percentage of the IT buying audience is actually looking for this. And they often don't want to have to get the sales to see it. So this is an opportunity for marketing to kind of move up funnel a little bit and take the deeper content piece and turn it into one-sheeter PDFs that can be kind of sprayed out there and promoted. Finally, maybe you take the same concept. You've got all this really good technical information. Your product marketing team is built. Maybe you are the product marketing team. You've got this comparison guide, so you're putting things within respect of, you know, where you sit within the marketplace, but also you're backing it with very qualitative, you know, kind of support from peers. That's great. You have all that. You have product reviews. You have all this great stuff. Well, if you take all of that, you could build what we would call like a product selector or a wizard, and maybe that takes all your solutions that you potentially provide, and this would be web-based or interactive. You put it out into the market, and it takes all of these things into one place. And so now your audience is going through and they're saying, okay, well, I'm kind of sold, but I want to know which piece of the product portfolio I should be buying. They go in, they plug in their information, and then you dish out, you need Series X, click here to buy or click here to talk to a rep. So it all kind of comes full circle. And at that point, that's the information they want. They're not, you know, they don't want to not be sold to you at that point. They just want the information, and then they'll raise their hand on their own. So if you go back to that sales funnel at this point, that would be a fantastic lead for intake and should be a closed won opportunity. So that's the Kevin Bacon rule of content. You'll see that we went from basically one piece of content at each stage, and at the end of the day, we're looking at 16 here in this hypothetical, this scenario, right? You can apply this to anything that you do, and you should. And for some of you guys, it might feel very straightforward. And I think for it is, and it's supposed to be. You don't want to overcomplicate this stuff. It's more about always ask whether or not you could do more with the content you're building. It's really that simple. All of this is a structure. If you want to go whiteboard it out, use this, right? This is what our team does. This is how we partner with a lot of our strategic accounts, and this is just a recommended kind of formulaic view of repurposing. It's always important then, this helps too, to make sure if we go back and look at our entire funnel and our nurture approach, how many gaps do we have, and how do we fill them more efficiently? And obviously, you don't want any gaps because we know there's a lot of content being consumed, 25 on average total, 16 alone from an IT decision maker. But we also don't want to be overwhelmed and spend a ton of money everywhere. So we know that repurposing allows us to take our heavier lifting efforts and get more life out of them and fill different gaps and needs. So hopefully this has been really interesting and helpful. I tried to get Kevin Bacon here. It just didn't happen. So I'm sorry if some of you guys feel disappointed. And I just hope this makes sense, you know, and if there are any questions or anything that you'd like to dive in on a deeper level, please email me. Sorry, I forgot about that progression to show that we have more gateable content. Email me at spicycontent@spiceworks.com. A lot of spice in there. And I'll hop on the phone with you. We can walk through what your 2018 strategy looks like, where your head's at, what you're thinking, and maybe where we can apply the same methodology. Or if you're just generally curious, if you want to dive deeper in the sales funnel, demand waterfall, that's something I can talk about all day long. You know, really just anything you've seen in this presentation that you'd like to talk about, just shoot me an email, and I will respond. Before we go, one more kind of plug. We have a really cool recorded webinar that we did, I don't know, a few months ago, called Make Your Mark on the IT Buyer's Journey. So basically kind of mapping a lot of your higher level strategy back into that experience and the mindset that this buying process kind of that the audience is going through. So check that out. The link's on here at Spicely/IT Buyer Journey. So that, and shoot me an email, and I hope that this has been fruitful. Thank you guys.